Hello and welcome, it's Natalie here. Today I'm going to show you how I made this 4x6 thank you card. The first thing I did was cut a card panel from white hammered cardstock from Hobbycraft using this Sizzix panel die. Next, I cut an aperture from the panel using some more Sizzix panel dies. This is a smaller version of the other one. So I ran this through my die cutting machine and just cut an aperture in it. So this is going to be a window onto some mixed media. Next I cut this frame from the same hammered card, and I used the die that I used to make the aperture and the next size up die. And all I did for this was I put my die down and then I added some tape to hold it in place on either end, like that. And that stops it jiggling around while I'm trying to line this up so there's an equal size gap all the way around. And I just eyeball this, and then I add 2 more pieces of tape. This tape won't tear properly today. I don't know what it is. I think it's slightly damp. And I just tape those down there when I've got it in the right position, where there's an equal space around all of the sides. Run that through my die cutting machine, and that gives me a pretty good frame with equal width sides all the way around. So that's how I make the frame. Now at this stage I can go ahead and glue that on there, and I'll just use my all-purpose glue. You can use whatever. I think wet glue is best because it gives you a little bit of a wiggle room when lining up the frame with the aperture, like that. So I can get that in exactly the right place. Just move it around slightly and press it down with my deli paper so I don't get glue all over my hands. And there we are. Next I cut out my heart from the white hammered cardstock, and this die I got from Etsy in a set of 4. I don't know what brand it is, it was just listed as heart dies. And then because I want this to straddle the aperture about 1/3 of the way down, so this bit of the heart here is about 1/3 of the way down the aperture, I just want to add a couple of little spots of glue right on the edge, because that's the only bit that's going to be glued down. The rest is just going to hover over the aperture, and that just sits nicely there. And again I can give it a good press down with the deli paper to keep my fingers clean. Whoops, try not to stick the card to it. Now it's time to create the panel, the coloured panel that goes behind the aperture. And I'm using, again, the same cardstock, the hammered white cardstock. You can use any decent heavy duty cardstock that will take a little bit of water, or mixed media paper or watercolour paper. And I want to make it slightly bigger, well, a bit more than slightly actually. I want to make it so it will go behind the aperture, but I'm also going to die cut some letters out of it. So I want that area really. It gives me a bit of choice about where I put the aperture, what bits I can see through it, and I can also cut out my letters for the sentiment. For the colour I'm going to use Distress Oxide in Saltwater Taffy, which is one of my current favourites, and just smush it down on the mat like that. I'm going to spray the card slightly because I want a soft watercolour wash to start with, and add a bit of water to my ink. And then I'm using my smusher. Now I make this out of a bit of old sandwich bag and some paper towel that I've scrunched up and put in there, and pushed it down so it's flat, and then stuck a bit of sellotape, sticky tape around there to create a neck, and snipped off the excess. And this, I find it a really good way of picking up colour and smushing it like the packaging technique, but with slightly more control than you get with the packaging technique. So I just pick it up like that on the bottom, and I can smush it down. I do want a fairly intense colour, a bit more water, because I'm going to put a bit of vellum behind the aperture. So what I want is for the colour to show through the vellum. But that's enough of a soft wash to start with. Now I'm going to dry it with my hairdryer. So that's a lovely, nice, dry, soft watercolour wash there. Now I'm going to use the same ink, pick it up with my smusher, and because the paper is dry, it's going to form more defined areas. It's not going to be so soft. There's going to be some hard edges, which creates a bit of depth. You've got that soft bit in the background and then the more defined stuff in the foreground. Now I'm going to dry that again. So I've got some ink left, which I can pick up with a paintbrush and spatter on for some nice defined blobs. Again, this creates a bit of depth, so I've got these small defined spots in the foreground. So even though I'm only using one colour, I can still create depth with changing the way that I apply that colour. Right, time to dry again. Now I can create more depth or add to the depth that's already there by splattering on some water, which I'll soak up with some paper towel, and this will lift some of the colour and create some light splotches. Not sure if you can see that, it's very subtle, and it's probably not necessary because by the time I put the vellum on top of this, you probably won't see much of the subtlety of it. So this card I'm creating today is a thank you card, and I want to add, I suppose almost like a hidden message using a stamp. This says heart full of gratitude, and that goes with the heart that I'm putting on the front of the card. I'm going to use the same colour ink, saltwater taffy, and do some stamping and do multi-generational stamping. So there's going to be a fairly dark one and then some lighter ones around. So it may or may not be readable behind the panel, but it will be there. I'll know it's there. It's like a little secret message, like I say, but also it will create some visual texture. And again, this is in the foreground because some of these are dark. It is a foreground pattern. It's almost more of a pattern than a sentiment at this stage. And just keeping them as horizontal as I can so they're not wonky. If I wanted to do wonky, I'd do them really wonky, but because I want it to be fairly straight, I'm trying fairly hard to keep it straight. So there we have my little almost secret message. Before I stick my coloured panel behind the aperture, I've got a bit of vellum that will cover the aperture from behind, and I want to splatter on some very pale gold. I love the look of gold on vellum. So I've got these Prima metallic accents. This is a bit of a hybrid palette. This is some of the paints from the original palette and some of the paints from the pastel palette, because I've used up some and so there were empty wells, and some of them I hadn't used at all, mostly on the pastel palette, so I've combined them into this one palette of paints that I regularly use. So just want to spatter on some gold like this, and it can have a good splattering. This is fairly weighty vellum. I'm not sure what the actual weight is, but it's printable vellum, and it is, as I say, fairly weighty. And I can dry this with my hairdryer. I'll probably put it on the lower setting so it's not too hot, but it doesn't normally damage or crinkle the vellum particularly. So that's dry. We're going to stick that on the back of the card panel, and I'm going to use tape runner for this because I don't want to warp my vellum with any more liquid glue. And this is Crafter's Companion tape runner, which I find is actually really good for adhering vellum. It doesn't show through particularly. So now that's on, we can just choose our area and stick that on. There's a bit hanging over the top, which I'll trim off. So that's pretty. I mean, it looks pretty on its own really, but I want to put my colour behind it. So as you can see, there's little bits of text that are readable once it's pressed down. If you wanted, you could raise this up on a bit of card or a bit of craft foam and it would be less readable, less defined. But I think we'll just go with that. That little area there is fine. So we'll chop that out. And I'm going to adhere that with tape runner again, so that the vellum doesn't get warped. I do want to try and make sure that the text is horizontal and not wonky. There we go. So we can read full of gratitude, heart. So there's the little message behind the window. Now this I can stick onto a card blank without any further ado. So for sticking panels onto card blanks, I tend to use my ATG gun because it's the cheapest of the tape runners per, you know, meter or what have you. I do want to add some extra card behind here to accommodate this layer, because otherwise we'll end up with a floppy card. It won't look level. So I can just eyeball that. Oh, there's bits of glue from the back coming around the front, and we don't want that. Let's tuck those all behind. That's the only downside I find with the ATG gun. You get these little bits of the tape runner glue hanging over the edge. So this is just a plain paper card blank from Hobbycraft, but you could, you know, you can use any card blank, obviously. Okay, that looks straight to me. I do have this thing where I put cards on and they look really straight, and then I come back, you know, an hour later and I'm like, that's so wonky. So I'll probably have that same experience with this one. Now I want to cut my thank you sentiment. And I've got these tiny little letter dies. Oops, not that one. And these are Crafter's Companion. I think they're the mini Gemini dies or something. So I'm going to get my post-it tape and put them on here. If I can pick them up, they're so small. Put them on here, cutting side up. Now, it doesn't matter at all which direction I cut from, because you're not going to be able to read any of the text that's on there. It will just be texture. So I can pop that on there like that. I'm going to put the dies back on here so I don't lose them, because they are so small. So for a bit of interest, I'm going to pop these up the side here. They're not sticky at the moment. I'm just placing them on so I can see, make sure that the letters stand out well. Because when you cut sort of randomly like I just did, there might be some letters that don't have enough colour on them and you can cut them again. But these are all looking pretty good. And just need a little baby wipe and a little spot of all-purpose glue. And all I'm going to do is dip them gently in there. If I get too much, I can just dab it on the baby wipe, but pop that there how I want it, and then go all the way up, trying to keep them straight and in line. And I'm going to get a clean part of the baby wipe and just dab down like that. You've got to be careful when using water-based inks not to smudge the ink, but that lifts up, I find, any bits of liquid glue that have squirted out the side. So here we are, a very clean and simple thank you card. I hope you like the card and that you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please do leave a thumbs up. Leave me a comment if you've got any questions. And if you want to see more from me, then do subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you back here very soon.